Hello, today is the 5th day of October 2025, and I'm Dave Sugarbaker, and I have a sermon that is apropos of Worldwide Communion Sunday, which is today. First, I'd like to start with this account from Luke 24 about the road to Emmaus. It has to do with Worldwide Communion Sunday. Now, on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus came near and went with them, but their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And as they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he were going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us?" That same hour they got up and returned to Jerusalem, and they found the 11 and their companions gathered together. And they were saying, "The Lord is risen indeed, and he has appeared to Simon." Then they told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So today is Worldwide Communion Sunday. It's the first Sunday in October. And in Christian churches around the world, communion is celebrated in a variety of ways and with diverging significance for different congregations. But at least in the midst of all the difference, everyone agrees on this day that we will celebrate the uniquely Christian rite, the Last Supper, the Eucharist, the Feast of Remembrance. Some churches don't feel like they've had a Christian worship unless they celebrate communion as a part of that service. And other congregations may have communion just a couple times a year. But this is one of those times when everybody observes communion, at least on the same day. Jesus and his disciples had just celebrated the Passover meal, a ritualized meal in which special foods have special significance. It was to help Jews remember the miracle of Passover, as the Jews, who were at that time captive in Egypt, were just about ready to break away to begin their wilderness wandering, and then after that, after a generation, their establishment of the nation of Israel. But I can imagine Jesus and the disciples having done all the symbolic Passover things and eaten all the symbolic foods, the lamb and the lamb shank, the bitter herbs, eggs, unleavened bread. They're sitting, or rather lying, around the table when Jesus takes two of the most commonplace elements of the meal, the bread and the wine, and he asks his disciples to remember him when they eat these two items. He takes the Seder meal that they've just celebrated and he turns it inside out. He says, whenever you have bread and wine, and that would be at almost every Jewish meal, remember me. This is my body, this is my blood, remember me. Now, I resonate with the God that Jesus taught about, a God of patience and a God of love. And I'm drawn to Jesus' teachings as distilled in the Sermon on the Mount and elsewhere. And I like Jesus' wit and his humor and his compassion, his consistency as well, as we see it in the gospel stories. But the earliest church saw no need to write the Gospels. They had the eyewitnesses. Peter and the other disciples, Mary, the mother of Jesus, Mary Magdalene, these eyewitnesses would sit with the earliest church as it came together, as it convened, and they would do the teaching. They would teach about Jesus' history. They would, from their own recollection, they would teach about Jesus' teachings as well. And when those first generation eyewitnesses began to die off, I'll bet somebody said, maybe we ought to write some of this stuff down. The earliest Christian worship was the breaking of bread and prayer. The Eucharist and prayer. This was the earliest version of the Mass. And from the very beginning, the church responded to Jesus' plea to do this in remembrance of me. Before the Gospels, before the letters from Paul, the followers of Jesus got together for the breaking of bread and prayer. Do this in remembrance of me. In the story about the two travelers on the road to Emmaus, Jesus became known to them when he blessed and broke bread and gave it to them. The church has affirmed time after time that Jesus is more than remembered. The risen Christ is alive and manifest through the bread and the cup. The two travelers returned immediately to Jerusalem. It took them 2 hours to get back to town. And they report to the rest of the disciples and the followers. They told what had happened on the road and how he had been made known to them in the breaking of bread. It continues to be true. Jesus is made known to us in the breaking of the bread and the sharing of the cup. There's an old hymn, often thought of as a communion hymn, written about a century ago. And it's poetry, as I'm going to read it to you, and I'm also going to read it slower because poetry is distilled speech. And it's important to let some of these words sink in before we move on to the next words in the sentence or the poem. Draw us in the Spirit's tether. For when humbly in thy name 2 or 3 are met together, thou art in the midst of them. Alleluia. Touch we now thy garment's hem. As the brethren used to gather in the name of Christ to sup, and with thanks to God the Father break the bread and bless the cup. Alleluia. So knit thou our friendship up. All our meals and all our living, make them sacraments of thee, that by caring, helping, giving, we may true disciples be. Hallelujah. We will serve thee faithfully. Now, God bless you on this Worldwide Communion Sunday. If you find value in this, I'd appreciate it if you'd pass it along. But in any case, stay safe, God bless you, and I'll see you soon.